Hello, my name's Cliff Stevenson and I'm the Helpful Economist. Consumers are paying higher prices for fuel due to insufficient competition. This is the conclusion of the Competition and Markets Authority, who recently published their market study on fuel prices. But I think there's something odd about their conclusions, and I'm going to tell you why. So the CMA found that over the past few years, there's been a lack of competition that's resulted in higher prices by an average of 6 pence per litre. And so they calculated that customers buying fuel from the four major supermarkets have lost out by £900 million in 2022. And the CMA further calculates that for a typical family car, the consumer could save up to £4.50 by checking the prices within a 5-minute drive. Now, my own back-of-the-envelope calculation suggests that because there's 33 million cars in the UK, that this £900 million actually works out at £27 per annum for each car. Obviously, this is an average, it's going to vary according to a person's usage. But this comes out on average around £225 a month. It doesn't seem that big, really. It's taken the CMA a year to complete this study, and there's 370 pages of analysis. And as I say, there's just something odd about it because they don't actually find any unfair competition issues, and they don't conclude that the supermarkets are abusing their market power, nor do they conclude that there's any kind of cartel. If they had found any of those things, the CMA has the power to act. But it doesn't. There are some interesting findings on motorway fuel prices, and I'll comment on that on the end. But the 6 pence per litre doesn't seem too significant, given that there's no evidence of a competition problem. So I find it somewhat surprising that the CMA has given this so much attention, and I do have a theory as to why this has happened, which I'll come to later. But the CMA concludes that the trend of increasing fuel margins over the period represents an increase in the supermarket's operating margin over that period. But there's no analysis of whether the 2022 margin is actually unfair. I actually doubt that it is. We can see in the chart that they made just over 5% profits in 2022. Now, these aren't excessive profits in any way. The CMA seems to have made an assumption which isn't really supported by any evidence, that because profits have gone up from 2% 5 years ago, that this is a problem. But they don't consider whether the 2% is a reasonable margin. Maybe that was low. There's no consideration of this whatsoever, and it makes the analysis seem really superficial. Now, my theory is that in normal circumstances, the CMA wouldn't have wasted this much time looking at this issue, given the absence of real competition problems. But the government initially asked them to do this study, and I think the CMA has to be seen to be doing something. They felt obliged to find something. They published a recent report on action to help contain cost of living pressures, and the fuel study is a major component of this report. Now, it gets worse. They recommended 2 remedies. The first one was that they said the government should require retailers to share prices on a real-time basis so that consumers could have access to this information. And this is an example of the kind of information that might be available to consumers. The CMA says that with greater transparency and shopping around, the typical family car can save up to £4.50 a tank within a 5-minute drive. I mean, at one level, it's hard to criticise improved price transparency, but it's an interesting question as to what will happen to prices when they are available in real time like this. If all consumers start checking prices on a real-time basis, the prices could never be out of sync, and what they will do is they will equalise. And there's an argument that they'll equalise at the higher level rather than the lower level, because currently at the moment, because there are differences in prices between different between different retailers, a retailer selling at lower prices can compensate for that by getting higher volume. Whereas if everyone goes down to the lower level, there's no volume advantage, so there's no incentive to lower prices. So although in principle a transparency scheme is a good thing, actually it may have the opposite effect by equalising prices at the higher level. And the second remedy proposed by the CMA is to create a monitoring function in a public body to keep an eye on retail fuel prices in the future. This seems a bit crazy. This is like creating an extra level of regulatory scrutiny, and it seems like overkill given the level of problem actually found. The CMA already exists to investigate if there's a real competition problem. I think, to be honest, the CMA found it limited what they can do, and in some ways they're just passing the buck because it doesn't really think that there's a problem, but it needs to be seen to be proposing something. As a final point, the study actually found that motorway service stations were selling at higher prices by 20p for petrol and 15p for diesel. And these are much more significant than the 6p found for ordinary fuel retailers. And in some ways, this illustrates the superficiality of the whole exercise, because this perhaps does suggest something anti-competitive. Fuel retailers in service stations effectively have a monopoly position, and you could make the argument that these kind of price differences are an abuse of that power and a profiteering. It's definitely something at least worth investigating, but there's no analysis of this at all in the report. In a way, my theory is it's too big for the remit of this particular work, so they didn't look at it, but it's definitely glossing over it and makes the whole analysis rather superficial. Overall, I don't want to be too critical of the CMA. It does do important work, but it's a real reflection of the sad state of our politics at the moment, that it's more important to be seen doing something than actually doing it. I hope you found this information useful. My name's Cliff Stevenson. I'm the Helpful Economist. See you next time.